can see is very extensive. So this took you, what, about a year to work on you in your office?
Yes, it did. Mm-hmm.
And what were some of the findings? Or actually, just explain the JOC process just as it relates to your findings.
Sure. This audit was initially prompted by several fraud hotline calls we received over the procurement process in Public Works. So that's how we started this Jock audit. Jock stands for Job Order Contracting. So it's a program within Public Works that aims and focuses on small scope projects to move along quickly, to get these projects done. The goal is to get them done quickly. And the key is a pre-established catalog. So this catalog has pricing for labor, for supplies and materials. And the contractors bid, instead of one price, they bid on a percentage. And so what we found overall, and I can go into the specifics, but overall we found that the city was really rushing and just focused on getting the projects done quickly rather than focusing on the specific scope and that they were competitively priced. And so that was one of the main problems we found, is that these contractors, they were using this, instead of bidding a single price, they were bidding on a percentage of the catalog. So they're bidding on percentages, and basically they were lowballing or submitting very low bids to secure the contract and then inflating their proposals so that they could make a profit. That was the overall gist.
So once they got the contract approved, then additional inflation came in because they already knew that they had it. So, oh, oops, we need this, this, and this. And you had to pay for it because it was already contracted.
Right. And two of the ways that we found that they inflated their proposals were they were using items outside of the catalog. So the catalog is the key in job order contracting. You want to use the catalog pricing because that's what they bid on, but they were using items outside of the catalog. And whenever you use items outside of the catalog, you can charge the city 100% of the cost plus a 10% fee. So the city was paying 110% of a lot of tasks and supplies and equipment when they should have been receiving a discount. So they the city ultimately paid more than it was contractually obligated to pay. So that was one way in how they padded their...
If JOC was set up to have contractors order through the catalog to keep those discounts, why were they allowed to go outside of the catalog?
Very good question. Staffing within the city, and due to budget cuts, there's been limited staffing. The city had to contract out several consultants to be running this program. They really didn't have time to review all of the proposals and cross-check and double-check and reconcile things. They told us during the audit they didn't have time. Things were just moving too fast, and there was pressure to get projects done, get it done, get it done. So that was really the focus. And so these things were happening outside. And as a result, the city ended up paying more.
Right. I would assume that you could actually put on any numbers you want as a contractor if you're not ordering within the catalog. It seems like JOC was set up to eliminate these inefficiencies.
Right. Yes, it was. But as a result, the city, I mean, there was a lot of projects happening. There were a lot of infrastructure needs throughout the city. There were limited staff members. There was a lot happening at one time. The scope of work that these contractors were supposed to do, they were very vague. So it was hard to tell initially if they were proposing, if the bids were even, appropriate, because the scope of work for the initial project was quite vague. So that's another item we found in the audit, was that the scope of work for these things needs to be really defined, what we really want and what's an appropriate cost for something like this. So that was one of the recommendations that came out in the audit, to have an independent check to say, hey, make sure during the bidding process that the bids were appropriate.
Right.
Well, right.
So when you say the city, do you mean what department of the city is overseeing these jobs?
The Department of Public Works.
The Department of Public Works.
Yeah.
So these all went through there. They were, you're saying, kind of short-staffed, if you will, because there should be a project manager on every single project, right?
Yes, right, exactly.
So were you seeing like a project manager now is overseeing too many projects at the same time?
Yes, and at the same time, there were a number of consultants that had a lot of authority and latitude to make decisions, a lot of decisions and a lot of things happening. And frankly, the interviews that we took place on these project managers just said that they were under enormous pressure to get projects done. And in a big city like the city of Long Beach with infrastructure needs, a lot of infrastructure needs, and at the same time budget reductions taking place, it was sort of a perfect storm for an environment like this to be created. But we did find that there was an overall systemic problem, a lack of controls in every area that we looked at, and it was highly vulnerable for fraud. And so this is what we found, and this is what we reported, and we have a part 2 to this audit of an investigation to review more projects and looking at the scope and whether.
So I read through the audit, you weren't able to get to every single project, but you got to several, so there's
Right.
still some outstanding. When you mentioned there was pressure to get these needs completed quickly, where's that pressure coming from?
I think ultimately it's the public that wants these things done, and as elected officials that represent the public, you know, they want things done.
Get it done.
And
get
so,
it done.
you know, I mean, the city really, we appreciate the elected leadership right now that took our audit seriously and that suspended the Jock program, so it's no longer operating currently, and that Mayor Garcia, he sponsored legislation that was recommended by our office to put things in place now so that there are policies and procedures and a framework and laws that will now govern this program. So if bids do come in too low in the future, the city has the authority to reject these bids where they didn't in the past, and they can rebid again. They don't have to just accept low bid or whatever. That there's now legislation that has been passed by the council, so when this program is renewed and restored, there will be laws in place that will govern this. And I think the public can have greater confidence and assurance that future tax dollars will be more secure in this program because of the policies and procedures that have now been established.
Right. When you talk about some of the infrastructure, do you know, like in terms of the operating budget for the city, how much goes into public works, into infrastructure?
Not off the top of my head, I do not. I know that since 2003, $68 million has gone into the Jock program. And so the real focus of this work, of our work here, was specifically toward the Jock program. And since we mentioned in 2003, $68 million has gone into this program. And as is mentioned in the audit, and as a result of our recommendation, there's a $500,000 cap now on projects that will go through the Jock program. So they're mostly in renovations and repairs of parks and libraries and city buildings, and a little smaller scope construction projects throughout the city that still need to be done in a timely way. But with this new legislation in place, we feel confident that there'll be more planning and a better scope of work, so we know exactly what is needed, and we'll know exactly what the city is paying, and we won't be paying more than we contractually obligated to pay.
You would think that you would need a minimum X amount of bids to make sure that each one is fair.
Yes, that's right, and especially when a Jock contractor is going to use an item outside of the catalog, because this catalog is really a key to a Jock program.
I think so. Why are they going outside of the catalog? That to me should be rule number one.
Right, and they use it for specialty items. What they say is, well, we have a specialty, but it was excessive, and other cities and agencies do have a cap on the amount of non-catalog items you can use, but the city didn't. So they were abusing it, and we found the excessive use of non-catalog priced items. And so now with the new legislation, there's a cap of 10% of the project cannot be outside
non-catalog items.
Yeah.
Well, this is why we love you, Laura. You are definitely the watchdog. You're saving the city and us as the individuals who live here millions of dollars. How much did you find that was misappropriated in this audit?
Well, one of our findings did show that because of the use of non-catalog price items, that the city did pay $1.9 million more than they should have. And so it will be a great savings in the future by just sticking with the catalog and sticking with the rules and moving forward.
And how far back did you audit? Only a year or two?
That's right. Yes, we did. We only did a 17-month period. I believe it was from October 2013 to February.
So that was 1.9 million. Can you imagine if you went all the way back to Jock's inception of 2003, you probably would find even more that was misappropriated. And in a city that's so strained, we just interviewed the police chief and the fire chief, and they have such great needs that all of that money is so important to the city.
Yes.
We can't waste it as we've been doing in the past.
No, every dollar is precious. It's taxpayer dollars. We want to make sure the taxpayers and the public are getting what they deserve, and that we have a responsibility as the leadership in Long Beach to ensure that there are the strictest of controls over the public.
Over the precious dollars that we need it to be maybe reallocated to some of these needs that we have.
Right. Exactly.
Well, we can't thank you enough. I quickly just want to revisit. You mentioned that these came in as fraud hotline calls. What were some of the calls like? What did they say when they called in?
Well, they are anonymous, so we want to always encourage people, if they have any tips for us, that you can rest assured that your tips are anonymous. But they had concerns over the city's Public Works Department, specifically in the procurement process. And as we looked into it deeper, there were several issues actually. But as we drilled down more specifically, we found that this was an area, the Jock program was an area that was most vulnerable to the fraud. And so that's where we have to, be smart about allocating our resources to, and where we zero in and where we focus. And this was the item that was most
the city
risky.
Is definitely lucky to have you. Thank you so much for creating such efficiencies in ways that we might not know they were lacking. So if you quickly want to give our audience the hotline in case there's other tips that might be needed to be called into.
Our hotline number is 1-888-FRAUD-07, and it's open 24/7. We encourage you to call. We get our best tips from our fraud hotline. And so if you suspect fraud in any way throughout the city, we encourage you to call our office, and we will follow up.
And I'd have to say this is such great timing. There's so much discussion around infrastructure right now, especially if Measure A passes, that the Public Works Department really now is ahead of some of these upcoming and potential projects that are now going to run so much more efficiently because of you, Laura Doud.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to visit with us today. We always love having you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.